Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to another session of In Dialogue Foundation Certificate Course in Dialogue Studies 2023-24. I am Alia Khan and I'm a volunteer at In Dialogue Foundation. I was also a participant of this course in 2019-2020. Today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Bindu Puri. So she's now associated with Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Her many publications include the monographs Gandhi and Moral Life, which was published in 2004, the Tagore-Gandhi Debate on Matters of Truth and Untruth, which was published in 2015. And her most recent book is titled Gandhi for the 21st Century, Religion, Morality and Politics, which is co-authored with Professor Mrinal Miri, who also happens to be her father, the great Mrinal Miri. And now over to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi. So, I'd like to start by thanking In Dialogue Foundation for inviting me to speak about this book, which is, I think, maybe the fourth monograph and maybe something like the 12th or 13th or 14th book, which is co-authored by me and Professor Miri and brought out by Springer this year, 2023. It's titled Gandhi for the 21st Century, Religion, Morality and Politics. Now, obviously, this book, as is evident from the title, is about the, kind of philosophical examination of Gandhian ideas, those that remain most relevant for the 21st century. And this exercise in this particular book is taken across an introduction and 6 chapters. Three are by Professor Miri and 3 are by me. And the chapters are individually authored, but they have continuities, which is fairly obvious in a book about Gandhi, given that there was an integrity in Gandhi's ideas and between his ideas and practice. So just to give you an overview of the book, the chapters are as follows. There are, like I said, 6 chapters. Satya and Ahimsa, learning non-violence from the Gita. Ethics, Western and Indian. For love of country, Gandhi and Tagore. Body, action, authority, ethics and politics. Then Gandhi's true politics and the integrity of the good life. Satya, Swaraj, Tapasya and Satyagraha. Then Gandhi's religion. Of these, I have written 3. Satya, Ahimsa, learning non-violence from the Gita, for love of country, and Gandhi's true politics and the integrity of the good life. And I'll speak here about some of the themes, but like I said, the themes are interconnected because everything Gandhi said and did was also powerfully interconnected. If you look at, so many things that Gandhi did, many of them are relevant. But if one is asked to identify certain themes in Gandhian writing which are relevant, I would, speak of the following. I would speak of non-violence and other Gandhian virtues, and also the centrality of the human body to Gandhi's ethical concerns. And these, in the book, Gandhi for the 21st Century, form parts of arguments and discussions in chapters 2, 3, and 5. Then I would speak of another important theme if I was asked to locate these themes. The alternative nation that Gandhi imagined India should become. And this, in the book, is chapter 4. Then about politics, the moral politics Gandhi envisaged. How different was it from liberal politics? In the book, this is coming up in chapters 5 and 6. Then the non-sectarian understanding of religion. And in the book, it comes in chapter 7. And of course, Gandhi's deference towards the non-human world and contributions to the idea of sustainable development, which we find, discussed in many chapters in this book. But in this lecture, obviously, I can't speak of all these themes. So I'll kind of speak only about 4 of these themes. Now, what are these 4 themes? And where should one begin when one talks about Gandhi's relevance for the 21st century? Now, a very, very obvious place which any Buddhi might think would be this whole idea of truth and non-violence, satya and ahimsa, inextricably related as they are in Gandhi. You know, in Gandhi, these themes are very, very closely linked with each other, right? Indeed, you know, that October 2nd is the United Nations International Day of Nonviolence. It kind of documents how important Gandhi is as the most famous practitioner of nonviolence in our times. So the first theme I'm going to look at over here is Gandhi's understanding of nonviolence in terms of its inextricability from truth. And just before I move on to the other themes that I will talk about today, it's very interesting to ask or to raise the question, how would one understand that which is distinctive about Gandhi and Ahimsa? And if one tries to answer that question, one is drawn to look at what Gandhi had said about his own understanding of ahimsa, that while he had been influenced by Tolstoy, by Christianity, by Jains, he emphatically asserted many times that he drew his own ideas of ahimsa from this warlike context of the Gita. And it's for him, the key message of the Gita was an appreciation of the non-instrumentality of ethical action and the centrality of truth and non-violence. So this is really what I'll pick up when I pick up that theme. Now, what is the second theme I'd like to talk about? That comes, out as his distinction between true politics, what he called moral politics, the politics of Swaraj, and liberal politics, which he called power politics. Now, there can be nothing else which is more relevant to our times than this distinction that Gandhi made and his affirmation that power politics should be progressively countered, even when he thought that it was not possible to purify it. And he thought it could be countered by such a true moral politics. Now, this politics of Swaraj of Gandhi is kind of very valuable, particularly in terms of the kind of politics we see in the world today. Gandhi was skeptical post the 1920s about the possibility of purifying this self-directed liberal politics of his and our times. But you see the global Gandhi, as it were, best by actually looking at his contribution to politics, through this idea of true politics. And you also see here his influence at all kinds of political leaders across the world. So, Martin Luther King Sr.'s contemporaries and friends, Marcus Garvey, Reverend Howard Thurman, who were leaders of the civil rights movement in America, met him in 1936. And they were really influenced by him. And then Martin Luther King Jr., very, very much influenced by Gandhi. And then you have people like Nelson Mandela, Václav Havel, the first president of the Czech Republic. Now he was a democratic elected president of Poland, the first since 1926. Aung San Suu Kyi, others. And, President Obama had very famously said that Gandhi's action stirred more than his words. So what is this true politics that President Obama speaks about as stirring, the world, as having an impact on the world? So politics of Swaraj of Gandhi is interested in freedom in two senses. One is freedom in terms of rights and, home rule, democratic government. The second is freedom in terms of self-rule or complete independence within, freedom within. And in this second aspect, Gandhi's politics remains integrated with morality and is powerfully alternative to the liberal politics of our times, which is, of course, based on a division between the private and public aspects of human life or individual life. So this is the second theme. The third theme is that Gandhi presents a powerful alternative to the modern idea of the nation state. He has a different kind of understanding of nation. And this kind brings him actually close to his political interlocutor and close friend Rabindranath Tagore. What is the modern nation state? It is the idea of a unity that a certain human population seeks to serve their interests, their desire for economic well-being, political sovereignty, security from internal and external violence, aggression. So by definition, the modern nation state is internally and exclusive and externally driven by a kind of collective selfishness. So this Gandhi attributed actually to modern civilization. So Gandhi actually had alternative understanding of the nation state, and it was understood as in terms of a community rooted in a living tradition, deriving a kind of organic unity from the community itself. So Gandhi believed in an Indian nation which was a natural expansion of the village community. It derived its life and energy from its past, its strength from a sense of ownership, belonging, dignity, respect, love for the great gifts of nature, the community inherited from ancestors. That's the kind of idea of nation he had. And this came very close to Tagore. And in this book, I have argued that it's very interesting how close it comes to Berlin's, great chain of mankind imagery and Tagore's great idea of the great Eastern nation that retains the local and the particular at its foundation. And obviously, this kind of Gandhian Tagorean nation remains relevant, at least in imagination, to inspire, if not guide, future generations of humankind. Now, the fourth aspect of the relevance of Gandhi for the 21st century comes from his affirmation of the equality between the human and the non-human world, animals and the natural world, and deference for the earth. So it follows that he should have put emphasis on the practice of non-possession, non-stealing, not keeping more than you need, which is very relevant and pertinent to the issues of sustainable consumption and climate change, which preoccupy our world. So this is really the four themes, and I'm going to pick them up one by one. So I'm going to pick up the first theme here, and I'm going to talk a bit about Gandhi and Ahimsa, which I think is one of the most obvious relevant themes in Gandhi for the times in which we live. And that he made an inseparable connection between Ahimsa and truth. It was very oft commented upon, Ahimsa is the means, truth is the end. I mean, truth is the end, and these are not really correct because they can be interchanged because there's no distinction between means and ends. They are two sides of a coin and so on. So he recommended that human beings should respond to human and non-human others with absolute respect, with love, non-violently. So in a Gandhian worldview, Ahimsa signifies more than non-injury. It signifies even more than compassion. Though he and one of his mentors, the Jain diamond merchant called Raichand Bhai Ravji Bhai Mehta, spoke about Daya Dharma, compassion, in connection with Ahimsa very, very, very often. Yet, Gandhi and Ahimsa involved more than non-injury and compassion. It involved non-injury, compassion, a cultivation of disinterested love for the human and the non-human other, fearlessness, the gift of fearlessness to those who differ from yourself, selflessness, absolute egolessness. So ahimsa is a kind of transformation in one's life which rests on understanding the worth and dignity of all life. And also, as Gandhi himself famously put it, it was a kind of owning of kinship with all manner of being. So it was a way of life that transformed a moral aspirant's response to those who differed from him or herself. So I'm just going to quote Gandhi here. So he says, look, ahimsa is not the crude thing that it has been made out to be. Not to hurt any living being is an aspect of ahimsa, but is its very least expression. The principle of ahimsa is hurt by every evil thought, by undue haste, by lying, by wishing ill to anybody. It's also violated by our holding on to what the world needs. So this is the kind of understanding that he has of ahimsa. Now, but consider, why should we turn to Gandhi to speak about ahimsa? Is ahimsa spoken of for the first time by Gandhi? Non-violence. It's there in many ancient traditions, and particularly the Indian tradition, replete with all kinds of references to non-violence. You see, in Buddhist philosophy, ahimsa, non-violence, is the basis of universal friendship. It can be cultivated by compassion, purity, staying away from anger. In Vedic philosophy, many references to non-violence you find in the Rig Veda and Yajurveda. One of the hymns in the Rig Veda say, "May all beings look to me with a friendly eye. May I do likewise. And may we all look at each other with the eyes of a friend." So you see, there are so many references to non-violence in Buddhist tradition, Jain tradition, Vedic tradition. And if Gandhi is being turned to for non-violence, what's so original, what's so distinctive about his idea of ahimsa? Now, if one looks for what is original in Gandhi's insights, the first thought is, of course, that in Gandhi, ahimsa is not only a vow, a vrat, of non-injury, but it's a virtue. And actually, the Indian tradition had no word for virtue. And it was Gandhi who transformed what were called the yam and niyam in classical Indian philosophy into what he called cardinal and casual virtues. This is not only a kind of a change of words, but it signifies a philosophical shift. Because for Gandhi, ahimsa as a virtue signifies a disposition of character rather than the taking of vows. So you cultivate a disposition of character now. Now, what is this disposition, which is called ahimsanat? It is, something which you cultivate progressively. It can't happen overnight. And it involves, as Gandhi said himself, step by step making friends with all the world. The second thing about what was original about Gandhi's understanding of ahimsa is quite, the manner in which he connects it with truth, which he then goes on to say is the same as God. So Gandhi is clear that ahimsa is not a commandment from the divine, but it is the only path to the divine. This equation is really actually more important than it might seem. And I'll just get to that. He says, look, truth exists. It alone exists. It is the only God, and there's but one way of realizing it. There's but one means, that is ahimsa. Now consider that if truth is God, and ahimsa is the only way of arriving at it, then the minute you're violent, you are away from the God of your religion that you're seeking in a Gandhian framework. So it's a very different kind of take on non-violence. This connection between truth and ahimsa is what led to the transformation of ahimsa in Gandhi's practice. For him, ahimsa became the only way in which an aspirant could arrive at truth or God. It was also the only way of arriving at truth between two conflicting parties. It was the only way of earning rights, we know that, by looking at his satyagraha campaigns. It was the only way of countering injustice through personal suffering or tapasya rather than inflicting suffering on others. So satyagraha literally meant non-violent insistence on truth or firmness on truth. So given that the connection between truth and ahimsa was so important, one needs to ask, why should Gandhi have connected truth with ahimsa? Well, one way we might understand this connection is if we consider that in Gandhi's view, ahimsa is nothing if not complete humility, egolessness. And one might consider that if we approach conflicts, other people, or any kind of search for truth, full of egoistic self-assertions, we might really find it difficult to arrive at truth. Because we would see things as serves our own ego, as serves our own self-image, and so on. So that's really perhaps why Gandhi connected ahimsa as an equality of respect towards the truth untruths of other people with truth, right? So a third important original aspect of Gandhi's discussion on ahimsa was very interesting, that unlike other people, he did not think that this ahimsa has to be very arduously cultivated in response to a command of God. He, on the other hand, thought that this kind of ahimsa and deference towards other people was part of the human being's innermost orientation or svabhav. It was natural to humankind. In Hind Swaraj in 1909, he wrote that satyagraha comes naturally to human beings. And then in 1926, in Young India, he wrote 2 essays on what is natural to human beings. And there he explained that it was man's svabhav, that to have this special virtue or khas lakshan, to own kinship with not, and I'm quoting him, with not merely the ape, but the horse and the sheep, the lion and the leopard, the snake and the scorpion. The difficult dharma which rules my life and I hold ought to rule that of every man and woman, impose this unilateral obligation, ek pakshi farj, on us. And it is only so imposed because the human is made in the image of God, silhouette of God. So Gandhi uses this idea of man's swabhav or ownmost orientation to say that, man, by virtue of being a man, has a unilateral, one-sided obligation towards the otherness of the different other. And such a sense of obligation to the other is thought most easily by this instinctive sense of what is owed to family members. And so Gandhi said, look, if you are a man, by virtue of being a man, a human being, you need to you will own kinship with those who are very different from you, whether they be human or non-human. And so ahimsa comes very naturally to the human species. Now, this is really what was original about Gandhi's thinking about ahimsa. Now it remains for us to ask, where did he get these ideas from? Did he get this, from Christianity, from the Sermon on the Mount, from Tolstoy, from Jains? So you see, for example, many people think that Gandhi was very influenced by the Sermon on the Mount and by Tolstoy's spiritual understanding of Christianity. And he wrote to Tolstoy. They had a very interesting dialogue. In 1909, he sent him a copy of the Hind Swaraj. And Tolstoy had this, conversation with Christianity, where he felt that non-violence was very central to Christianity. So others speak about the influence of the Jains on Gandhi and ahimsa. Most notable here is Akil Bilrami, who says Gandhi was so influenced by Anekantvad that he had a relative understanding. His notion of truth was entirely relativist. Still others like Bhikkhu Parekh have argued for a cross-cultural influence on Gandhi's theory of ahimsa. Now, why do we need to ask what were the influences on Gandhi's idea of ahimsa? Because if you know what were the influences, you can understand it better. For example, if you look at Akil's argument that he's got, lot of, influence of Jainism on this notion of ahimsa, then it becomes very difficult to consistently explain if Gandhi really thought that truth was relative to the point of view and had a relativist understanding of truth, why he would have spoken about ahimsa as absolute truth or God. I mean, how would he have spoken about truth as absolute truth or God? Because, on this view, ahimsa is drawn from a relativist kind of understanding of the world. If the world is indeed many-sided, pluralist, and Gandhi is endorsing a metaphysical pluralism, and therefore he thinks that truth is entirely relative to your standpoint, how is he consistently speaking about absolute truth or God? So this is the kind of problem we find ourselves in when we look at the, sources. Now, what about, Gandhi himself? Gandhi himself said, look, though I'm influenced, I cannot deny that, I have been influenced by Tolstoy, with whom I've had an exchange, and the Jains. He himself said that, I have been very influenced by the Gita in coming to ahimsa. And here you find this whole non-dualist metaphysics of the Vedanta kind of influencing him. In this book, I argue that Gandhi seems to dwell on the argument that connects a metaphysics of oneness with an equi-mindedness towards all, according samatha, or the status of equality to all being in the here and now. And in this, he departs seriously from the Advaitic idea of levels of reality, because in the Advait, though everything is equal and there's a metaphysics of oneness, yet there are different levels of reality. So while everything may be, equal at the paramarthik satta, at the vyavaharik satta, you have inequality. But Gandhi, so it's not, of course, surprising that a commitment to ahimsa follows from the idea that Gandhi reads into the Gita, that all being is the same as one's own being. So we should meet all these other beings, which are absolutely equal as oneself, with this equality of deference, with the same deference that one has to oneself and to those who are close to one. So Gandhi said, very clearly, and I'm quoting him here, I do not believe that my philosophy is an indifferent mixture of Tolstoy and the Buddha. I do not know what it is, except that it is what I feel to be true. It sustains me. I owe much to Tolstoy and much to Buddha. I still somehow or other fancy that my philosophy represents the true meaning of the teaching of the Gita. This is what he says, okay? Now, what is it that leads Gandhi to draw non-violence from this warlike context of the Gita? What is it about the Gita that leads him to think that its key message is not to justify a righteous war or promote the view that action is an instrument to ends sought, but rather that the Gita is giving the message of non-violence and absolute equality of being? Now, we also need to recall here that, why the Gita comes to be so important to Gandhi is that in the 1900s, both in nationalist politics in colonial India, in the wider world of readers, you find that the Gita, becomes very prominent. In 1783, it becomes known to the Anglo-American world through Charles Wilkins' English translation, and that follows a Portuguese translation that had been available to European readers in the 1830s and 1840s. Post all this, you find the Gita comes to be very influential, and it scholars like Emerson, Thoreau, Conway turn their attention to this text. So the Gita also becomes a central text for nationalists, in colonial India. From the 1880s, it becomes very important to the debate between colonial officials, missionaries, and Indian radicals who interpreted Krishna's advice to Arjun as legitimizing the use of violence in the Indian struggle for independence. So Gandhi's contemporaries like Tilak had taken the Gita to justify, righteous war, and such interpretations had centered around reading the Gita as defining the exception to the law or the principle of nonviolence. So, um, Gandhi is like literally going against such interpretations because he is arguing one that the Gita is not teaching, is not defining the exception to the law or principle of nonviolence. He's actually suggesting that the Mahabharata is not a real war, but it is a kind of allegory of the intense moral struggle that is going on within the mind of a man who's facing powerful conflicts of desires within and seeking a way to liberation. And even if it depicts an actual war, Gandhiji would not find any problem in recommending ahimsa as the path to deal with the war. That would not be a problem for him. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So the discovery of the non-instrumentality of moral action in the Gita becomes the key point for Gandhi to reach Satya and Ahimsa as the central teachings of the Gita. For Gandhi, this becomes clear once you reflect what is the central event in the Gita. He says, look, the central event is this Arjun comes and tells Sri Krishna that, I don't want to fight because these are my relatives. I don't want to kill them. And the latter replies, no, you must kill them if you are ready to kill anybody at all. So he says, look, you can't discriminate between your own and others. If you want to cut off with a sword anyone's head, then you should be ready to cut off your father's. The point for Gandhi was that once you realize that you can't cut off the heads of your relatives, you would realize that violence in all forms is abhorrent. And you cannot discriminate between your own and others and make exceptions for your own people. That's the whole point, because everybody is equal. Everybody is the same. Everybody's got the status of equality. That was his point. So to Gandhi, the significance of Sri Krishna's emphasis on cutting off one's father's head, if one would be ready to cut off anyone else's head in similar circumstances. The significance of all this is that, this kind of, there should be absolute equality, and this would be effected by an engagement in presence-centered, spontaneous action for itself, without an attachment to results. That is desireless action recommended in the Gita. Now, when people just look at the action that they are doing and not at ends, and they have to be content with the action in itself, it's not that when you're doing that, there are no ends to your action, but that those ends come unsought. You don't seek them. You don't justify your action in the light of those ends, right? So once there is an engagement in presence-centered action, all sources of evil within the inner life of the moral agent, Gandhi believed, would be destroyed, leaving no possibility of countenancing violence against the other. So Gandhi, spoke about the meaning of the Gita, saying that the overall teaching of the Gita is not violence, but non-violence. And the Gita talks about the Sthita Pragya, the man who is not driven by anger. And it wants us to be incapable of anger. And once you are incapable of anger, obviously you are incapable of violence. So for Gandhi, the message of the Gita was this kind of action, and he took this as recommending ahimsa as a kinship with all, and samatha, and this whole idea of presence-centered action, where every action was an end in itself. So this is one theme in Gandhi, which I've picked up in the book. Now, the other one is Gandhi's true or moral politics. And this real politics is different, according to Gandhi, from liberal politics, which he described as power politics. That is the politics of seeking elections and power. This last idea is built around the idea of governance as a product of the social contract. And no matter how differently this contract and state of nature be conceived in Locke, Rousseau, Hobbes, for instance, across the differences of interpretation, the contract remains purely political, negotiated between citizens in the public domain, right? What is Gandhi's true or real politics? Like I said, it is the politics of Swaraj, and this Swaraj has a twofold meaning. One, complete freedom from colonial domination. Two, freedom over one, true freedom within, which is total controls, restraint over oneself, so that the agent is free from any kind of slavery to desires when acting. Because a person who is under the control of very many desires is obviously a slave to them, and then not really free to act as he or she wants. So the second kind of Swaraj becomes very important in Gandhi, and it is not dependent on the first one. It can be achieved even if you are not politically free. So this Gandhian Swaraj was, or the politics of Swaraj, true politics, real politics, I have argued in the book, was based on an integrity connection between religion, politics, and morality, between the public and the private aspects of individual life. The politics was premised on integrity between the public and the private. So the human being ought to live an undivided life for Gandhi, whether engaged in politics, economics, religion, and this integrated life would be integrated around his fundamental moral beliefs. Now, this is why Gandhi opposed the political philosophy of Tilak, right? He did think that pre 1920, that this kind of liberal politics could be purified. But later on, he began to think that, it's not possible to do anything with the politics of power, and that one should engage in an alternative politics. Why would Gandhi want to engage in an alternative politics? That's because this truth was very, very central to Gandhi's idea of the good human life. The good human life was a life spent non-violently in the pursuit of truth, which is why Satyagraha was very central to his various pursuits. And this Satyagraha, the non-violent firmness on truth, became the method of participating in politics. And anyone who participated in politics as a Satyagrahi was actually having a sense of protection from the corrupting influence of liberal politics or power politics. Now, why should this at all be important? It becomes a kind of ideal point of reference for those engaged or those witness to the machinations of power politics in our time. Now, did Gandhi understand liberal politics at all? The one that he was rejecting? But of course he did. He traveled, many times from South Africa on lobbying missions to London. He was well familiar with the institutions of liberal democratic governance and with the practices. And yet the closest he came to, a lot of, let's say, violence in speech was in the Hind Swaraj, when he was critiquing this kind of politics. What were his difficulties with this kind of liberal politics? I'll say, that he in Hind Swaraj said that I'm rejecting such a politics. The government of England is not desirable, not worth copying by us. At one level, this rejection implied that Gandhi was critical of liberal democratic, the institutions of government in liberal democracy. Second, at another level, it meant that he was critical of liberal political practices which sought to regulate national life through a system of party politics and elections to centralized representative bodies. And he said so. in the Hind Swaraj. He says parliament is like a sterile woman, so on and so forth. However, these and other difficulties that he had with liberal democratic politics, its practices like elections and so on, were only symptomatic of a deeper malaise, and he attributed that malaise to modern civilization. The first argument that he made against liberal politics emphasized that liberal politics and modern civilization, on which such politics is based, takes a one-sided view of the self, thereby breaking the integrity or wholeness of individual life by denying the relevance of the inner life to life in the public domain. From the relegation of inner life to and its religio-moral considerations as speculative, less than rational, to private space, modern politics created a bonsai-like compression of the self in the public domain, so that the citizen came to be seen purely as a physical entity. Liberal politics of power revolved around such a self. Naturally enough, it sought only the bodily well-being of the citizen, and so it broke the integrity between the private and public aspects of the life of that citizen. Now, the second difficulty that Gandhi saw with liberal politics was closely associated with the first, having identified that the central premise of modern civilization and liberal philosophy was the differentiation of private and public life. Gandhi insightfully argued that it was this differentiation which banished religio-moral considerations from any import in the liberal public space. And, he says that. He says in Hind Swaraj, this civilization takes note neither of morality nor religion, and there's no inducement to morality. And though, English people may be good in their private aspects, as insofar as they are parliamentarians, they cannot really do any good. So this is now how would politics be practiced if it was not going to be practiced after the liberal fashion, this politics of Swaraj? Well, for Gandhi, it would be integrated, this politics, around an inflexible determination to follow truth. And so Satyagraha became the instrument and became the kind of a protective device, because the Satyagrahi had to be true to himself, because he had to practice, as you know, self-restraint and Swaraj, rule of self over self. Now, this kind of politics obviously was integrated around moral conceptions and a non-sectarian religion. And in 1940, Gandhi spoke about the difference between his real politics integrated around moral notions and power politics. And to a speech on the Gandhi Seva Sangh, he explained that I have observed power politics, and he says the politics which we are renouncing is the politics of acquiring positions of power within the Congress. We cannot take part in this politics. I'm not talking about an individual. I'm talking about the Sangh. Power politics has no place in the Sangh. This power politics is such a dreadful snare that individuals will have to quit it. Their non-violence would be put to the severest test there. They too will quit when they have some bitter experiences. The Gandhi Seva Sangh has come into existence for carrying on the constructive program that alone is real politics. So he talks about the difference between his own politics and power politics. And it would be fair to say that this real politics organized around truth, satyagraha, and an engagement with service, the constructive program, becomes an alternative politics where citizens would live out their life through all the pursuits, religious, moral, economic, aesthetics, integrated around the devotion to truth. So this is Gandhi's alternative. Now, moving to the next theme, what is Gandhi had an alternative conception of the nation, which I've already talked about. And so it's very interesting that most people look at Gandhi and Tagore as rejecting the nation. But I have argued in this book and elsewhere that they actually came together in a love of country, expressed in a resolve of building what Gandhi called Praja and Tagore called Nesan, Nesan, the great Eastern nation, in continuity with the pre-modern communities of India's past. And they believed that this nation should be modeled closely along the lines of harmony in diversity, in the spirit of Tagore's Swadeshi Samaj, indigenous Indian society. This alternative Eastern decentralized nation was like one which was built local upwards, and it made friends with different others internally and other nations externally. So this, is a very important theme in Gandhi and Tagore, which is very relevant to our times. In this book, I have argued that there's really no greater testimonial to the persistent Eurocentrism of academic discourse in Indian universities than, when you look at the debate between scholars in the Indian Academy about the critique of the modular form of the Western nation in Tagore and in Gandhi. The most important, point over here is that they believe that anyone who is critical about the Western nation is critical of the nation per se. And there's no possibility of imagining, countenancing that Gandhi or Tagore, among others, were imagining a third possibility, that is an alternative Indian nation, one built up, in a different way. Now, the state, Gandhi spoke about Surajya, that is a good nation, and it was referring to an alternative state which was not aggressive, not hegemonic in relations to other states. It was not built on an enlightenment-driven understanding of an individual as a purely political being. The state which he wanted was to be based on the conception of the individual as a composite of a body and soul, with private and public aspects of life necessarily seen as integrated together. The Gandhian state was to be a protector of rights, one where the 18 areas identified in the constructive program would be a priority, and the state was in close conjunction with civil society. Decentralization was a key word here. It was to go out in concentric circles from the local to the international. So, so this is really the idea where the local would keep the immediacy of the face-to-face community, so that, you're going up, making space for the bonds of friendship. Now, in both the novels, Home and the World and Gora, Tagore makes this point. And Tagore's Gora is the first political novel. It was written in 1910. And here, Tagore makes arguments which become important in this context. The first I mentioned is the emphasis on the local. The second is conjuring possible futures for India to bring out the powerful ethico-political potential of this unity of interrelationship and friendship or maitri in society as both nation and world making. And the third point that you see in Gora is that in adopting an aggressive, homogenizing nationalism imported from the West, both the hero of this novel, Gora, and India would adopt a future nation which would affirm the nation of the West, even in the act of rejecting. So this is really the pointers you get in Tagore and Gandhi towards building an alternative kind of nation. And I think this alternative nation is relevant. It's a moment for us to think about another kind of nation, one which is more in keeping with the fact we live in a heterogeneous country and a very, very plural world. The last thing I would like to say as a theme, which is important, is the relationship between the human and non-human universe in Gandhi. So Gandhi is most relevant to our times because he thought of the relationship between the human and the non-human world along the lines of an absolute equality. And he, I already quoted to you, he said you have to own kinship with the snake and the scorpion. They are part of your family. And this makes an alternative to modernity because for modernity, it's very man centered, it is anthropocentric. Gandhi sees the world very differently. He speaks of non possession, non stealing. What is non possession? Don't be possessive to persons or things. What is non stealing? Do not hold on to things which you don't need. So, this brings him to the center of what you need now for sustainable development, for all the idea of climate change coming to an end, being restrained. So Gandhi looks at the world ahimsanatli, looks at the non-human universe as an end in itself. And this is in complete harmony with his real politics of service, emphasis on the ties with the local community. Of course, Gandhi was nothing if he was not practical, and he left a talisman by which those on the path to the good human life could evaluate their own actions. And I'll go back to this talisman before closing this talk, for it brings the practice of non-violence, non-possession together with Gandhi's alternative concept of the nation and his understanding of the politics of Swaraj, real politics, moral politics. What is the talisman? The talisman is, I'll give you a talisman whenever you are in doubt or when the self becomes too much with you. Apply the following test. Recall the face of the poorest and the weakest man or woman whom you may have seen and ask yourself if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to him or her. This is the talisman. So, you can think about this every time you engage in this politics of Swaraj, every time you engage in any kind of moral, religious, political, economic activity. So this is really Gandhi. And please do share any comments you have here, either here or you can definitely message me on Twitter at @Professor Puri. Thank you.
Congratulations on the new book, Dr. Puri.
Thank you. Thank you. So you can see if there are any questions from anybody.
Let me just mention the lecture was fantastic and you squeezed in so many things in short time. It was such a primer. Thank you so much. And Pragya Narang, who is the course coordinator with us, she would like to ask you a question. She has raised her hand. Pragya, go ahead.
Hello, Professor Puri.
Hello.
So, loved the lecture. I've actually studied at my postgraduate diploma on Gandhi and Peace Studies.
Wonderful.
So this is something very close to my heart. But there's something that I have been wondering through my course, as well as through whenever I read about Gandhi and everything that he did, especially his fasting. So I think somewhere he had also mentioned that fasting only works when the opponent in front of you has some kind of a conscience and who is not completely stone-hearted. So keeping that in mind and your book about him, his relevance in 21st century, how far do you think is it relevant? So, for example, we take the example of Iram Sharmila, who took 16 years of fast, and it was a non-violent fast. It did not change things. In fact, the people who she did it for did not even give her more than 90 votes or something. And then also not recently, it's been a few years, but some man, I'm forgetting his name, he died because he wanted clean Ganga, and he was doing this really long fast. And in a country like India, where Ganga is revered, and there's a government project also running, he was doing that, and then really nothing happened. So how far do you think Gandhi's non-violent fasting technique is really relevant in a society which I feel, in my personal opinion, is has a very dulled conscience right now?
Well, that's an interesting question, particularly in the context of the Gandhi-Tagore debate. Because, Tagore was quite critical to him privately in letters about the fasting. And he was that your sacrifice, but his critique was a little different from yours. His critique was along the lines that it will encourage people to, self-immolate, and that in the hands of lesser men, it would just become a misguided kind of tool. And, so, of course, Gandhi was, in a certain sense, you're wrong. He did not think that it would only work if people had a good conscience or a good sense of morality. He thought, actually, that people all had that sense. And it was a question of invoking the goodness in them. And how do you respond to injustice? So here you see Gandhi was not a masochist. He didn't want to go in for a fast, as an act of masochism. He was wanting to respond to injustice by the idea of taking pain on yourself rather than inflicting pain on others. So where would you choose to fast? Where the other option was to be violent. So how it wasn't really that you undertook fasts just because that's really what you felt like doing one morning. It was that if you are responding to an injustice, how do you respond? Now you can do all kinds of protests. But Gandhian idea was that you take suffering on yourself instead of making other people suffer. And why do you do that? You do that to demonstrate to other people how serious you are about the truth. And how do you affirm your seriousness? Not by shouting on rooftops, but showing by example that I'm taking all this suffering on myself because I'm serious about affirming the truth. I could affirm the truth by kind of hitting you, but I'm going to affirm the truth by taking on pain on myself. And this is a very interesting idea he got from the Indian tradition, the idea of tapasya. And he kind of transformed it. It was no longer just a practice of austerity or penance. It was a kind of instrument for dealing with injustice. So that's really what it was. So you first got to locate it. It was not penance or austerity. It was a method of dealing with injustice. And it was only resorted to when there wasn't another option, right? So in that sense, this is where you've located as part of that method of dealing with injustice. And to say that he thought it would only work where people had conscience, that wouldn't be at all, be correct, because it was actually meant to evoke the goodness in other people. And I think, to a large extent, he managed to do that. But remember one thing, that Gandhi wouldn't believe that you could undertake tapasya or do a movement without adequate preparation. So remember when he was asked to get involved in, Champaran, this gentleman called Shukla followed him for 1 year, and he didn't. He only got involved when he went there and made a proper study of the whole place and, understood the grievances and spoke with all the parties, including the planters and the peasants, and then took legal recourse. And when nothing else worked, that's when he engaged in disobedience and so on. So it was never that, today I decide I'm going to take a fast. There was a whole amount of understanding of everybody's point of view before, because it was really not penance. It was actually a kind of way of affirming the truth. But to arrive at the truth, you first need to go and investigate the truth. And that's really what Gandhiji used to do.
Thank you.
Thomas, Dr. Puri, Tulika is next. Tulika, would you like to introduce yourself? And by the way, congratulations, Pragya, too, on your on the diploma on Gandhi. Tulika, please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Hello, Bindu ma'am. So I have a couple of questions. First one is, can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So, ma'am, as you said, Gandhi was a anikantvad believer, basically the reality of manyness, right?
No, I said that definitely, but of course he said it would be correct to say that I believe in it, but my Anikantvad is all my own. It's
For
not
sure.
the Anikantvad of the metaphysicians.
Okay, but then, ma'am, when he says ahimsa is the absolute truth of God, I mean, how?
Ahimsa is the means to absolute truth of God.
Okay, it is the means to
Only
absolute,
means.
only means to absolute truth of God. But, ma'am, my point is, how would that work
No, it wouldn't.
in the
That's
era?
why I have taken an issue with Akhil Bilrami, and the report of that debate is
Mhm.
published in the Rutledge History of Indian Philosophy, where I have kind of said that obviously Gandhi didn't have a relativist understanding of truth. You're quite right. And fairly insightfully, you have pointed out that in case Gandhi was really a relativist about truth, he couldn't speak of absolute truth of God. He couldn't even engage in debates. And there were famous debates in Gandhi's life with Tagore, with Ambedkar, with Savarkar. So clearly he believed that you could arrive at truth. So he didn't have a relativist understanding. That's
Ma'am,
really what I pointed out.
all right. And the thing about sthita pragya, that we have to have a still mind. What if somebody,
Yeah, go ahead.
what if somebody harms me or something? Am I supposed to have a still and a calm mind? What if somebody hits me? Do I not hit the person back if I am a Gandhi follower? And yeah, I mean, I'm just skeptical, ma'am. How would this work at this point of time when we are so hopeless about our future and our lives? Everything has become so unpredictable. How do we I don't understand, how do I make myself understand, no, you have to follow, because maybe it could have worked back then, but do you believe it is something that we could follow at this point where we are, where the world is right now, and we could follow what Gandhi said? And ma'am, my last question, which I also asked to Mrinal sir, I just want you to give me one desireless action. And I have been asking this to most of my professors.
What do you mean by one desireless action?
Ma'am, like they say that we are not supposed to attach ourselves to the outcome of our actions. I just need one example of desireless action, like one action which a person does and doesn't think about the result or the outcome or the profit of it.
So let me just go back to your other question first, the second one,
Sthita Pragya.
Tulika, where you said that, you find this idea to be very unbelievable. And how would you respond to people who are harming you? So I'm just going to take you just to Gandhi first in 1909 and all across his life. He wrote a lot about the thief. You see, many figures in the colonial struggle use the example of the thief. So Tilak very famously said, if a thief comes and rapes and robs me, am I just going to sit down? Will I not answer him? So theft defines the exception to the law of non-violence. So Gandhi took this example up many times. I've spoken about many responses in another book that I wrote as well. So this thief becomes so central to Gandhi. He says, look, if there's a theft, how will I respond to it? You think there's only one way of responding, with violence, right? Stopping the thief and so on. But I don't think so. I think if the thief is your father or brother, I don't know how you would respond. You would not respond with violence. How would you respond? So he says, I would respond in one way, whether it's my brother, my father, or a stranger to me. I think the best way to respond is just to keep all your, next time you just keep everything nicely and leave everything convenient for him and keep doing it. Let him keep coming. And at some stage, he'll stop. And so there's this very nice example from Akil that he and his father had gone for a walk and they saw a wallet lying there. And Akil told his father, let me just take it. So the father said, don't. So he said, why? If I don't take it, someone else will. So the father said, no, don't you understand? If you don't take it, no one will. So the point is that, how goodness, the romance of goodness, right? So think about responding to violence with violence. Does it work? It doesn't work. It unleashes a circle of violence. Here, the idea is to respond to violence or bad things that happen with equanimity. Just with equanimity. And then you kind of perhaps show other people, that you are responding with love to their hatred. And you trust that other people also have some goodness. And if this is sustained, then the cycle of violence would be broken, because that's the only way really to break it. Otherwise, it's just a question of me slapping you, you slapping me back, then I giving you 2 slaps, then you giving me 3 slaps. Then look at the alternative. Till we destroy each other or the world. So that's one thing. And the second thing, you are thinking that they are examples of disinterested action. No. All our actions are to be disinterested. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that they have no end, but that the end comes without my consciously seeking it. So when I know I'm reading this book or giving this lecture or, engaging in this research, it's really not that I don't know that there's going to be an end. Of course, I know there'll be some end, but it's not like I'm doing it for the end. So the end comes, but it's not something it's not the reason why I did this. My action is present-centered. I'm trying to understand this, and I'm trying to understand this. And I'm not bothered whether this is going to result in something, the ends are coming, they are not sought by me. That's all. So every action is a disinterested action. So let's say, I go and teach, or I give a lecture, and let's say I get paid for it. Of course, that end happens. But I didn't give the lecture because I wanted to get paid for it. I gave the lecture because I just gave the lecture. I was happy giving the lecture. Are you getting me? Every action has to be disengaged.
Ma'am, with due respect, I don't agree with both the answers.
No, that's fine.
Ma'am,
actually is fine. But
yeah,
you have to be conceptually able to counter that, right?
Yes, ma'am, for sure. So basically, the desireless, fruitless action stuff. Everything.
It's not fruitless.
Okay.
It is that the fruit comes.
The fruit comes.
It's not something that it comes unsought. The idea of an end coming unsought.
But ma'am, whatever I do, I
you
know
do
the
it
reason
because
I'm
of
doing
the
this.
end.
Yeah, it
Don't
is
do anything without an end. Tell me, supposing your mom is sick, why do you look after her? Because you think she'll leave you money when she dies? Or you just do it because you want to look after her?
It is because I am emotionally connected to her.
Yeah, so you do it because you want to look after her.
It is because she has done a lot for me. So
can I just interject? Yeah, that's what I was getting at. She did
There
it
was no
without
end.
thinking that when she falls sick, you are going to do something for her. So that is where the string of actions that Professor Puri is
relationships
talking
mostly
about
are transactional, right?
So is it a transactional relationship? That's what I want to ask now. Is your relationship with a mother not transactional?
Ma'am, don't you think it is?
No, it isn't, because then it's not a relationship with the mother. If it becomes transactional, then it's a business. If I say I'll look after my mother because she'll leave me 5 crores, and I'm looking after her with that end of 5 crores in view, then I might as well be engaged with a business partner in running an IT model. There's nothing of a mother-child relationship anymore. It's just business. It is quintessentially a mother-child relationship because we are engaged with it for its own sake. We are
Ma'am,
happy with it for its own sake.
it
Okay,
isn't
so
that
we
matter,
can,
she doesn't
we
give
can
me
leave it at that. In case you are able to form an argument and are able to counter Bindu Puri's argument, then we can take it up. But otherwise, in the meantime, we will take a question from somebody else if anybody has any. Munir?
Yeah, may I?
Yeah,
Go
please.
ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor, for this lecture. So there are a couple of things I would be adding to Tulika's thing also. So first of all, when Gandhi was in the struggle for freedom, wasn't he seeking freedom? And wasn't he envisioning a free India or a state of Swaraj or anything? So wasn't it not present-centric only? First of all, one. Second, when you talk about mother and ailing mother and you take care of her, isn't it because you want her to be well? Because if she is not well, you are psychologically not in a good state of mind and you want her to be well just to be at a state where you feel that, okay, this is okay, we are good. So it's a sexual, not sexual, but a kind of a psychological satisfaction that you yearn for because you feel that your mother is not well, your family member is not well, then it doesn't work. You are not happy at all. So instead you have to be happy, so you do it for. So the happiness becomes a result. So that will be Tulika's. But my primary question would be, ma'am.
No, let me answer that first.
Yeah, yes, please.
So when you look after your mother because you want her to get well, you do it because you want her to get well. There's no other end in view. That's the point.
Yeah.
It's not like it's done because you're going to get some money or because some end external to her getting well is in view. So it'll become transactional because you want an end. The looking after is present center. It is you're just looking after her to look after her so that she gets well, she has no pain. It's not like you seek an end. If any end comes, for instance, she, grows old, remembers what you've done for her, returns it to you in some way, that is unsought. You didn't do that action for that reason. So that's about that. The other thing you said was, did Gandhi want to make India free? So that the goal of India's freedom was the goal that prompted everything else. Let's say the engagement in Satyagraha. So it was action which was determined by an end. It was action which would be justified in the light of India's freedom. Right? Yeah. So it wasn't present-centered. Now that's, difficult to countenance because, for instance, when the, movement, civil disobedience movement was at its heights, and let's say, you see that at Chauri Chaura there was violence. Gandhi called off the movement because it was present-centered action. The violence could not be justified in the light of the end to be achieved. That is the independence of India. Swaraj is political self-government. No. So because it was present-centered action, it could never be justified. So he called off the movement entirely, overnight, at the cost of annoying a lot of the other leaders. So it was never about the ends. And so he wrote in Swaraj, do you not tremble to make India free by assassination? What will be the result? It will be a nation of murderers. And he said, look, your idea that there is, that the end justifies the means is terribly wrong. Supposing I have a watch and I got it from stealing, then it is not my watch. It's a stolen watch. You get it? So for him, It is the action that counts. So that's my response to your two questions. Now come to your other question.
So, ma'am, the Gandhian state that he envisions, or the state of Swaraj, it seems it's more akin to the Saint Augustine's city of God. And where do we place the injunctions, religious injunctions like Islamic, Judaic, who have a propensity of, I won't say violence, I would say at least self-defense mechanism that resorts to violence in many ways.
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
I think that the Gandhian state, which was very contrary to the liberal political state of modern times, how do we incorporate in that state a religion like Islam or Judaism, or even atheistic or other non-religious perspectives, who take head-on action against oppression, who don't resort to non-violence, who because of their religious injunctions they resort to these things? How do we accumulate and assemble and live a great good accept those people in a Gandhian state? Is that a possible thing to do?
Well, see, Gandhi would tell you that actually, if you go to the core of those religions, whichever religions, Christianity, Hinduism, Jainism, Islam, at the core of all these religions, they would accept truth and non-violence, because he believed that truth and non-violence were there in all religions. So he would say at the core, all religions would agree with this. Now, I can't say whether people, adherents of different faiths, would agree that all these religions respect other human beings and, recommend non-violence and devotion to truth. But what Gandhi was trying to say was that if you really want to seek the truth, you need to ask yourself whether you would be able to arrive at the truth by cutting off everybody else's head. The likelihood of arriving at the truth in that manner seems difficult. And a little reflection might lead us to believe that if we really want to find truth between two warring sides, the way to get at it is to kind of calm down our sense of self, our sense of what we believe, and then, without ego and anger, try to see where the truth lies between us. So it's a methodology of arriving at the truth in a way. So it's not any definition of the truth. It's not like he's saying truth is as the Hindus see, or the Christians see, or the Jains see. He's just saying if all these people see truth differently and they need to arrive at justice between them, the only way in which they might be able to is if they approach the conflict non-violently. And I suppose, you can go to Rawls in contemporary times and hear him, not that he's recommending non-violence, but he's explaining that the only way you can have stability of justice is if you come to some kind of overlapping consensus on certain values that all of you might accept, among which is civility and tolerance, because pluralism isn't going away. So how are you going to deal with pluralism? I think that's the question. So, obviously, if we all agreed about ultimate questions, but then, even when you say how about all Muslims, or how about all Christians, or how about all Hindus, you tend to forget even that is not a homogeneous category. There is no all this and all that. It's deeply plural over there too. So once that external agent is removed, the pluralism will come over there. And are you going to exterminate all opposition to a particular way of looking at it? Then we'll just have to keep exterminating everybody till we get at the one or two people who are left, who share any belief. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And I feel once all the, the big factors for opposition are eliminated, then the small things start cropping up. So that's also why you'll be left with only one person if you're looking for convincing.
Eventually, yeah, because so many different, as many people, as many interpretations.
Mhm.
Freedom in the mind, once you begin with some kind of freedom, there's bound to be pluralism.
So, okay, moving on. Asna, you have a question?
Actually, I don't have a question on the side, but I'm just curious to know your opinion on Gandhi and Ambedkar's dialogue on caste, and Gandhi as a person who even says for equality between human and non-human factors. How does Gandhi see equality with among humans, between humans? So I would like to know your opinion on that. Thank you.
No, I've written a book on the Gandhi-Ambedkar debate. That was prior to this one. Also bought out by Springer in just like a few months prior to this. So, I think, in the case of Gandhi and Ambedkar, I think they were both interested in very much the same things, but their worldviews were very different. It's not even that the concepts that they used were pointing out the same places on conceptual maps, but I think they meant very many different things, even where they used the same word. And that's eventually, I would say, it is a contrast between modernity and tradition. So I think Gandhi wanted to take everybody along. And he had, he did not believe that a past can be obliterated, as it were. He thought, for instance, that history could be retained as itihas, a kind of continuity with the past. And that justice, meant something very different from what Ambedkar thought it meant. So that's the way I look at that debate. I think it was a conflict between two very good men, but who had very different worldviews. That's how I would look at it. And about equality, I think, that he, for instance, read the Gita as a text about equality. And therefore, he becomes a challenge, a vote of dissent to orthodox readings of the Gita who might have read it very differently. And he felt that there is like complete, it's not only an equality between animals and men, but between animal, men, and nature, so that the natural world cannot be utilized for the interests of men. And therefore, he put a lot of priority on a parigraha, non-possession. He said it is actually stealing if you possess things which you don't need. And you should be non-possessive, ultimately to people and to things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Asna. Zikra? Okay, you can write down your question, Zikra, and we can take it up. But for now, we'll go to Poonam. Poonam?
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. You're audible.
Yes, good evening, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. And thank you, first of all, for giving such a enlightening lecture. And so I don't have question in the regarding of your lecture, but I was just wondering, regarding this only Gandhi's philosophy, resolving the international conflict, like current conflict going on between Palestine and Israel. So, despite being all other international platform to get involved and engage, mediate in this conflict, countries like US refraining from to maintain their bilateral relation and diplomatic issues. So how, unlike India being the propagator of the we call Gandhi our national father, but being from that country could not give that kind of suggestion and involvement. So how we can see that all the failing of the international organization in like resolving the conflict, and it feels like everything materialistic things become important rather than lives of, I'm not like even talking about which country versus country, the life of the innocent people, like the people who are actually like common people suffering from this misery of the war. Yeah, I just want
no,
to
no, no. I'll just tell you that I'll go back to Gandhi's hymn, the hymn he really liked by Newman, that don't look to see the distant scene, one step enough for me. So, to say, oh, this one is not doing and that one is not doing, and the nation is not doing and the international is not doing, is like, I always tell my students in the class, let's look at the immediate environment and let's look at what we can do every day. And once we can move ourselves forward, then we can speak about other people, right? So one step enough for me. If you even translate that into your own life in terms of not responding with anger to difference, but with love and understanding, or at least try to use, these methods. For instance, suffering in your own self rather than making others suffer. Staying equi-minded, that is not getting torn by extremes of emotions of anger and love. Trying to evaluate every action in itself, not justifying your action in the light of ends, demonstrating some kind of commitment to truth and non-violence in your own everyday engagements, then step by step, learn to make friends with all the world. So I would go with that.
So Zikra says, does your book address the adaptabilities of Gandhi's principles in today's global and complex society, especially concerning in regard to religious, moral, and social context?
Well, actually, religion is treated in chapter 7. So, yeah, it's on the relevance of Gandhi for the 21st century. And so it does, in a sense, address these things. I guess we see how the absence of non-violence or interest in truth, the pursuit of only truth as I see it, what kind of spiral it leads to, and where do we go from there? So, as Judith Sklar put it, liberalism was a liberalism of fear. It was born out of the conflicts in Christianity and the denominations of Christianity. So once we see that, where do we go if we completely, as we have, depart from these principles, then the relevance of Gandhi becomes all the more apparent, right?
So Poonam is back with a question. Poonam?
Yes, ma'am, like you answered that, like we can start from the individual level. As an individual, I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to like empathize the person and people around me. So it's easy, not that difficult, like to follow that principle. But how can we deal with the like bigger like group level conflict with the philosophy of Gandhi? And also like why it is easy for international organization to declare 2nd October as a like non-violence day, but not use that in when there is practical situation going on?
Well, I can't really comment as to why international organizations do what they do. Probably you'd have to reflect on the distinction between liberal politics and what Gandhi calls the politics of Swaraj. But I think to think that it's easy as an individual is because you are not practicing it enough, because it's certainly not easy as an individual. Somebody comes and slaps you or is mean to you, it's very hard to respond to them with love. Or if someone steals from you, your automatic thing is to confront that person. How do you deal with it? So the point is, if we begin with ourselves and if we respond to difference with love, not romantic love, but love as in, let's say, an equality of respect for the views and truths of other people. We might find that others would so respond to ourselves as well. So that's how I look at it.
Okay, so if you allow me, Professor Puri, I would like to ask you a question.
Yeah, please.
Poonam's question reminded me of an article that came out in the Indian Express by Professor P.R. Kumaraswamy of JNU. And he commented on how Mahatma Gandhi's views on the Palestinian issue was half-baked, and how his comments on how Palestine belongs to the Arabs, just like England belongs to the English, and things like that. So what are your comments on this, on these facts?
Well, I've not read the essay, so I can't say what he wrote, Kumaraswamy. I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't.
Yeah, so he said that he shouldn't have that the comment by Gandhi that Palestine belongs to the Arabs. You know that statement, right? Just like England belongs to the English and France belongs to the French, right? You're familiar with this, right?
I'm not even familiar with that statement.
Okay, so he is.
Sure, and I'm not sure about this essay that you're referring to because I haven't read that essay.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
but
yeah.
I can say that, how would I respond? Well, I would say that in a Gandhian framework, internal pluralism is not really a problem for him, because, in a Gandhian framework, every human is different from everybody else. And he thinks the proper response to difference is really to respect everybody's truth just as much as one's own. So that for him, if people have different beliefs, and, for instance, he would think that India belongs to every community living in it. And he said, just the fact that there are people of many religions living in India do not make it difficult to be one nation. When does, one religion define one nation? So those who think that religion defines nation do not have the spirit of nationality in them. So basically for Gandhi, it doesn't even matter if people of different religions or different, let's say, different denomination would cohabit a particular space. Because for him, eventually every human being is your kith and kin, and you're sharing the universe with snakes and scorpions who are also your kith and kin. Mm-hmm. That's really the perspective. How do you look at difference? Eventually there's a lot of difference. And, if your response to difference is one of non-violence, then the spiral of violence doesn't start in a Gandhian framework. So if you are a person who is not going to slap anyone back, it's highly unlikely that people will keep slapping or beating. If this was widespread enough, then, you may not have so much violence in the world. It's hard to imagine human beings to be, I suppose now I don't know, but in general, I think it's very hard for people to stab you if you are not willing to hit them back. You would have to assume that there's no goodness in them. So I don't know. I'm not a commentator on international relations, but this is how Gandhi would look at the world, or how someone like Tagore would look at the world. Remember, Tagore lived through 2 world wars. So I think he thought that it was really the way that nation had been conceived, as a collective, aggressive, economic, political interest. And that if we would rethink what nation ought to be, something which was like going up more relaxedly from the local onwards with a deep pluralistic ethos, where a lot of cooperative kind of programs were used in concentric kind of circles going upwards, rather than top-heavy and homogenizing kind of political identity, then it would be easier to accommodate difference within and without. So, eventually, then you would have more of friendship with different people. So it's like the way that the nation is conceived as a modern nation, conflict of this kind is inevitable. So eventually we're not really going with a Gandhian concept of nation at all. We are going with top-heavy, collective, homogeneous identities where self-interest is really driving these conflicts. And they are not local build-up. So no one cares for the man in the local community on either side. That's really the point, I guess. So I think you excuse me now because I have another meeting, and it's been delightful to be in the lecture, and thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Puri, and we'd love to have you back soon.
Thank you
so much for taking out time for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.